In this video, we are going to go through the process of creating a workflow action. Workflow actions are actions that appear in the designer palette, but themselves are actually made of a workflow itself. The way that we do this is taking advantage of PMG's workflow functions. Workflow functions are the workflows that are built within the designer that are intended to be used as a function. I can call a workflow and have some work done or get some data back, and I can use that in a number of ways. Workflow actions is one of those ways. To make a new action, we start with our workflow designer, and we will create a simple workflow called add to numbers as an example. And I'll just leave it as the default, creating this as a service. And I will start the process of adding two numbers together. So we have a math action that I can take advantage of. And this math action takes two numbers and an operation and will set an output. So this means that I need to provide two numbers to this action and also specify a variable to hold the output. And I can do that within my start step in my variables. And I will declare number A as a number B as a number, and finally a result as a number to hold the result. I can go back to my math action now and specify that I want a number A, to be my first input, number B to be my second input, and I'm using the control space type ahead to get this variable in here. I need to pick an operation, so I'll choose add, and then finally set my result. So I have now a workflow that I would like to use as an action, so I will go ahead and deploy this. And now that it's deployed, I can declare it as a function, which then can be used as a workflow action. So to declare this workflow as a function, we go to Manage, Workflow Functions, and I am brought to the Workflow Functions Management screen. And here I see some already existing functions that have been created. And I will choose to add a new function, and I am told that the current workflow has been used to define this new workflow function. And I can see that the workflow name has automatically been brought into my function's name and path. And this name will be the name that shows up in the palette eventually for my new action that I'm creating. I could provide a help description for this action. Here we see that the workflow selected is add two numbers, which is correct. That is the function that I want it to call, or the workflow that I want to be called as a function. And I have an execution mode. I'm going to ignore that. It's not used in the mode of workflow action. And I have output type as variable, and that's correct. Again, it's not particularly used because we're using this as an action. These options are applicable in other modes. Run as user, I'll ignore. Finally, I have input and output variables. So here I do need to specify that number A and number B will be the inputs and that result will be the output. And much like this action itself already has first number and second number and some options, this will drive what ends up being the property panel of this new action that I'm creating. And once I save this, I can actually do a test. I'll go ahead and do that quickly. Save this. And I see by saving it that I'm offered the opportunity to provide 2 numbers. So I'll put in 10 and 15 and hit test. This is great. So I see that 10 plus 15 results in 25. Actually, the result happens to just be the name of the variable that I created. It's very nicely named in this case. And this is a JSON document, which is relevant for other modes of using workflow functions. But we're just going to take this as a given for now and just assume that this is going to work the way that we need. And I have declared a workflow function as an action. So by default, when I created this and saved this, it now shows up in my palette. So I'll refresh my designer and navigate down to the functions section. And I see a new action that I did not have before called add 2 numbers. So let's make a new workflow that will actually use the workflow action that I just created. So we go to File, New Workflow, and I will name this Use Add 2 Numbers. Again, we'll just leave it as the default service type. And in this workflow, I will find my add 2 numbers. And just like any other action, I now have add 2 numbers as a brand new action in my workflow. And I see that it's prompting me for number A, number B, and then allowing me to set a result. So let's go ahead and put some test data in here. I'll put in, say, 30 and 40. And I need to declare a variable to hold the result. So we'll put added number as our variable name. Choose that for our result. And lastly, I'm going to test this workflow, so I need a way to see what the result ends up being. And we'll just go ahead and throw a status step in here. We'll select my action, add to right. And for my status, let's simply say what the new added number will be is my status. So I can deploy this workflow now, and that's necessary for me to test it. And much like I just created a workflow to be used as a function, I can go ahead and test this workflow. So let's go back to Manage Workflow Functions. I could save this workflow, create a new service, tie the service to this workflow, and order it. That's a fine way of testing this workflow. But this, you might find, is a bit faster and does not require the creation of test services. So in this management screen, I see that I have add 2 numbers. That's the workflow action that I created earlier. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to add my current workflow, use add 2 numbers, as yet another function. But in this case, we're simply going to use it to run a test. And in order to see the workflow that runs, I have to choose an execution mode that's going to let me see the process diagram, and that is run in workflow engine logged. So this is, you can consider this the classic mode where the workflow runs and gives you all the details that we need to see about this workflow. To test this, I do need to save it. And it tells me that when this mode is used, it needs some identity to run the workflow as. So I'll go ahead and choose this auto-populated current ID, which is me. And I will save this workflow again and click test. And I have a pop-up window, and hopefully this will actually be my new workflow that I just created. Use add 2 numbers. And this is great. I see my status as 70. And if I wanted to, I could click into the step details for any of these actions and actually see the variable that I created, added number, will have the value of 70. And so this is a very straightforward, simple example, obviously not as complex as normally would be used, but it illustrates nicely how I can create a workflow and use it as an action directly within another workflow.